we have a teen class if you want to go to that one, so that's good. And I've been really looking forward to this one because I've been wanting to surprise you guys with interview style. Today's not going to be a sermon, it's going to be an interview, all right? And we've been talking about relationships, effective relationships, and a lot of it's been kind of person-to-person kind of thing, and influence in the workplace, and how we can shine our lights for Jesus. This one's going to lean a little bit more into marriage relationships, which are also very important, that kind of thing. So, but the principles we'll talk about will apply across the board. So, you know, there's so many good relationship experts out there. I really, really wanted to find the very best one that I could. And so I looked long and hard. It turns out I did not have to go far because there's one right in my house. And I'd like to introduce our relationship expert, Noelle Hendrick, LCSW. A lot of you know her as Noelle, or the pastor's wife, or the lady who organizes the ladies' retreats, or a lot of different things. But many of you don't know just how much she does to help people with relationships. She's got 2 part-time jobs right now. One is working in a trauma unit where she has to deal with people in very tense situations and family members and provide resources. The other thing she's been doing for last 1.5 years or 2 now is counseling, just therapy. And she is an amazing therapist, and I tell you what, our culture is in a lot of need for relationship enhancement. There's a lot of things out there that people are just needing help with, and while that's good job security for her, it's also troubling for our culture, but something we need to understand more about. So I was talking with her, and I was like, there's so many directions we could go with this. I don't want to turn it into a marriage seminar. Actually, I want to do that at some point, but maybe not in this series, just maybe a one-off from what we're doing in our series. But I want people to understand what's important about relationships. So what would you tell them, Noelle? And she's like, what if we spent some time busting some relationship myths? Talking about things that a lot of times people assume are true about relationships, and maybe even reinforced in some ways in culture, but they're really not true. And I was like, okay, well, let's do that then. You're the expert, right? So we've come up with about 7 relationship myths. I say we, it's kind of like, Mary, we need to take the garbage out. And I know what that means, all right? But in this case, her, has come up with 7 relationship myths. And we're just going to deal with them one at a time. And kind of the format we'll do this in, I'll mention the myth and talk about a verse that kind of corresponds to that. And then she'll elaborate on why that's a myth and why it shouldn't be believed. Fair enough? You guys ready to go? All right, myth number 1. Here we are. Good relationships don't require work, and fights ruin relationships. All right, that's really one out there. I know because, I've always believed that good relationships do require work, but I used to think that fights mess up relationships. First 2 years of our marriage, I refused to fight with Noelle. And it was, I lost every one. I didn't like losing after a while, so I started fighting back. If you think relationships don't take work, I just want you to think about the passage you hear probably half the weddings you've ever been to in your life. 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind. I don't even really have to go on beyond that, because that's enough work right there, right? To be patient is work. To be kind is work, right? And the more you live with someone, the harder it can become, because we know them, that familiarity breeds contempt. So, Noelle, why would you say that that's a myth, to say that good relationships don't require work?
Well, because good relationships are like gardens, right? If you plant a garden and you go outside and you're like, oh, I'll get to it later. I'll get to it later. I'll get to it later. What happens with the garden? It dies. And our relationships are like that, whether it be a spouse or whether it be our children or it be a friend. If we don't put the effort into it, we will not get the gain out of that as well. One of the other things that you mentioned was fighting. Fighting is actually a really good thing. I'm not saying fighting where you punch below the belt is a good thing. I'm saying fair fighting is a good thing, because if you don't get to a resolution, if you don't get to the point where you have an understanding with that person, all you're doing is fighting. But when you're fighting in a productive way where you're trying to resolve whatever the issue is, you feel confident about that. You feel like like, oh my goodness, we're partners. Yeah, you know, you don't like this, I don't like that. Okay, how can we work this out? One of the myths I think that people think is relationships do this, and they never do. They do this, and they do this, but they never do this.
Do they do this?
They do.
Okay, just making sure. We'll make sure
Yeah.
we're normal.
So I just think that, you know, when you are approaching a relationship, again, whether it be your children, your spouse, your parents, a friend, whoever it is, investing that time in there and realizing that you both have a will and you both need to come to it in a win-win kind of circumstance. There's a book out there called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and one of the concepts is a win-win, where both parties win. Now that doesn't mean that you're gonna get your way or they're gonna get their way. It means that you're gonna work it out until you can both win. And so I think if we approach it in that way, sometimes that can be helpful.
Yeah. So as long as we're pressing towards resolution and solution, and the timing's good and the temperament's good, fighting's a good thing, right?
Yeah, it
Okay.
is. And also, again, I just want to point out that point of resolution.
Yeah. We're not just fighting to win. All right, so myth number 2, avoid voicing dissatisfactions early on. You know, I think the thought there is, well, I don't want to rock the boat too much. I don't want to tell that person that I'm dissatisfied with this. But you know, and you may not really at first glance think this passage applies to that, but I want to explain why it does. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said, simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's just one of the basic teachings that Jesus has. And I used to think that was all just about honesty, but it's really about relationship. It really is about relationship, communicating well with people. So why wouldn't someone wait a little while to voice a dissatisfaction? Or what if they just want to keep the peace? What's the myth about that?
Well, and keeping the peace is not necessarily a bad thing, but when you're not authentic with your communication, whether that be verbally, body language, whatever, then the other person is not really able to read your brain. They don't know. And so what I think that this does is it sets a precedent for what the expectations are in the relationship. So if, for instance, let's just say beginning of relationship, somebody does something, they're maybe late all the time, and so, or they're maybe taking God's name in vain or something like that, right? And then that is really something that bothers you, and you don't say anything. It's interpreted as, oh, well, that's acceptable. I can be late, and it's no big deal. And then 5 years down the line, you go, well, that sort of irritated me. And they're like, wait, no, you didn't say anything. Why didn't you say anything? And so I think that in our communications with our spouse or our parents or our friends or whatever, we do need to be authentic in those and let our yes be yes. And I think one of the things I just made a note here, future expectations about the roles that we play, the initiative that each one takes, communication styles, and other relationship dynamics. Early on in relationships, and you probably know this looking back over your own relationships, with friendships or whatever, oftentimes the dynamics or the cycles that you get into early on are the ones that you carry on throughout. And then it's that concept that Barry was mentioning, that you want to, you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to make things tense, but they already are. So it's trying to find that balance. How do you talk through those things?
Excellent, good. All right, myth number 3. They should know exactly what they did to upset me. You know? Have you ever said or heard, well, if you don't know what you said to upset me, then we've got a really big problem here, right? Okay? As if we can read each other's minds, okay? So why is that such a myth? What's the dynamic working there?
Well, one, no one can read your brain. You can't read their brain, they can't read your brain, right? And so, and which thing was it that torqued you off this time? We don't know, right? Was it A or B or Z? I mean, which one was it? So really, using your words and asking the question, what made you upset? Is there something that I did to hurt your feelings? And if there is something that I did, be willing to go, oh my goodness, I did hurt your feeling. I am so sorry. Would you please forgive me? I think one of the things we forget, even in our society, is really truly how to say you're sorry. And I think it's kind of like a 4 or 5 step plan. One is to voice it, well, to hear first what the person is hurt over, and then to express back, I am sorry for, and then you fill in the blank. I'm going to work on whatever that is. Let's just say I yelled at you, okay? So it would be I am so sorry I yelled at you. I'm going to work on my tone and my words and how I say them to you. Would you please forgive me?
Yeah, when you put it like that.
And what I'm going to guarantee you is before I speak from now on, I'm really going to think about it. So, and how can I make it better? Because I think sometimes we just go, well, I don't know about you, but my teens go, sorry. Right? It just doesn't feel authentic or heartfelt. It kind of feels like real, like cheap forgiveness. You know what I mean? It's not authentic. And so I think we can truly, with even our asking for forgiveness, to be able to talk with our spouse and not just our spouse, but our friends, our parents, again, any relationship we have.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
The beef that we have is when people say, I apologize. That is not really saying, I'm sorry. I don't like that when people say, I apologize.
Or I want to.
Or I want to
Okay, go ahead.
apologize.
Yeah, okay, I'm ready, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's
The
true.
words, I'm sorry specifically.
Right, those words are
Yeah.
so
Right.
important.
And
Thank you.
for, what are
I
you
wanna-
sorry for, right?
I want to interject that too, because I went to leadership training in dentistry, specifically managing an office, and one of the leadership companies told us, instead of, if there's conflict with employees, to say, if somebody's hurt, instead of apologizing to them, you say, I'm sorry for the impact that has had on you.
Mhm.
There's no ownership there.
That's not
Yeah.
meaningful
That's
either,
not.
no.
What
It's like,
is
I'm
that?
not really sorry for
But
what I
they-
said,
Yeah.
but I'm
Right,
sorry to hurt your
for the
feelings.
impact, yeah. So
Sorry
I
you're
just
so
thought that was-
oversensitive.
That's really
Yeah.
terrible,
Right.
terrible.
Well, and I think too, not only that, but really pulling out what you're sorry for.
Mhm.
Now, there's times that Barry and I will have a conflict, and he'll say something, and I will have hurt his feelings in a certain way, and he'll need to hear something specifically, or I'll need to hear something specifically. And I think that's a good point too. When you need to hear something, it is up to you to say, I need to hear you say, you're sorry you hurt my feelings. And if the other person can authentically say that, then great, right? And he'll often say, honey, I am sorry for hurting your feelings. I'm not sorry for what I said because I did mean that. But I am sorry that hurt your feelings. And then he'll ask me, why did that hurt your feelings? Right? And so we'll go into that, again, the resolution piece of arguments or fighting.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the rules we have in our marriage, is when we hurt each other's feelings, and we're not hearing from the other person what we need, we can tell them, here's what I need to hear. And you know what? Our rule is, we won't say it unless we can authentically say, I'm not just gonna say it to end the fight.
Right.
But 99% of the time, if she needs to hear something from me and she tells me what it is, I can honestly say it. I can. And then there's that 1%, and we don't quite get to resolution as quick on those. But really, 99%, that's pretty good odds, right? That's great. Now, I didn't mention the verse with this one, but I want to. In Luke 10, the story of Mary and Martha, you remember they were both kind of sitting at the feet of Jesus, but Martha was in the kitchen taking care of things, right? And she expressed her desire, hey, Lord, I'm upset. She didn't even expect Jesus to read her mind, although he could, right? Lord, can you tell Mary to get in here and help me? I'm taking care of this kitchen stuff all by myself, and this is bothering me. She was very forthright with what was bothering her. Now, unfortunately, it was one of those situations where Jesus was like, hey, Martha, Martha, dishes can wait this time. Right now, Mary's doing what's more important here. And so, but that opens communication up, right? And as long as we can stay humble and we are pressing towards solution, even exchanges like Mary and Martha and Jesus had can be productive, and I think they were.
Well, and it's important that you don't hold it in. It's important that you don't let things kind of, tally along where you're like, well, there we go again. They made me upset. There's another one. There's another one. Well, it gets overwhelming after a while. They're not keeping score most of the time. So be able to communicate those things. Hey, this really hurts my feelings. And sometimes we even have to scale things. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, I'll say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is like a 5 or 6, and he'll go, oh, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Or he'll say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is like a 2. And so it helps me contextualize, like, oh my goodness, he's really, really upset, or he's just a little bit perturbed. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a difference in that frustration level.
Yeah. But mind reading is not an assumption in marriage, all right, or friendship. So sometimes people don't know exactly what they did to upset you. Myth number 4, if you're truly happy with your partner, you don't need to be close to anyone else, all right? So kind of a scripture reference with this. Now, I don't think David I need to go back and check the timeline. I don't think David was married at this point, but he had a best friend named Jonathan, and it was, guys' night out quite often, right? And David and Jonathan were just best friends. And there's this verse that in 2 Samuel 1:26 where David says, the friendship love I have with you is even stronger than the love I have for a woman. Now, some people misinterpret that in our day and age and culture and try to bend that into something, David saying something about Jonathan that wasn't true. He's just saying we are such close friends that you meet a need that in our friendship that even a woman doesn't really touch. So, it's interesting to see that a lot of people feel like if I just find that one person who meets my romantic needs, they'll also meet every need I have, and I won't need to be close to anybody else. I can just pour my whole life into them, and they'll pour their whole life into me. So what's wrong with that kind of thinking?
Well, so the myth is being that you don't have any other people around you. That might be true if you're massively codependent. But we don't want to be massively codependent. We want to be healthy. So part of that being healthy is having other people in your life. How many times have you had a situation where someone has told you something for years, and then someone else says it, and all of a sudden it clicks with you, like, what? I've been missing that. It could be a parent, it could be a spouse, it could be a kid, right? And then it connects with us in a different way. So a lot of times we need those relationships. Think about all your relationships, from your parents to your best friends, right? Best friends in preschool, maybe high school, college friends, that have been people who've been able to speak into your life in different ways. One of my best friends growing up in high school and college, and even in my early adult life, I would be so silly with her. I mean, it was awesome. I could be so silly with her, and Barry could tell when I had been around Danielle. He was like, oh my gosh, you've been around Danielle, haven't you? Yes, I have. But we have different pieces and parts to us where we need support in different ways. So having a support team around us is a good thing. Our security of ourself, our security in our relationship is very telling when we have other people in our lives. It is a good thing to have that support. And if someone is not wanting you to have that support, if there may be, and we'll cover this, I think, in a minute, some
Like a control issue?
jealousy.
Yeah, that's next.
Yes. So I'll hold off on what we're going to say about that. So.
Yeah, good. So, and that is the next one. That jealousy is a sign of true love and caring. In other words, I love you so much. I'm just jealous of anybody else, And so jealousy is not always a good thing. One time in the Bible have I ever read where jealousy was a good thing, and that's when it says the Lord's name is jealous. And in that context, it's used differently than in every other place in the Bible, where God is saying, I want what is best for you so much, and I know I am best for you, and I don't want you serving lesser gods and being out there, that kind of. He wasn't jealous of the other gods. He was jealous for the person who wasn't getting what was best. That's a godly jealousy. All the other times in the Bible I've read, I can't think of another exception, there might be one out there, but jealousy is a bad thing. Jealousy is listed among the acts of the sinful nature in Galatians 5. Verses 19 and 20 says this, and listen what else goes along with this certain aspect of your life, okay? What gets lumped in with jealousy? The acts of the sinful nature. I'm just going to start in the middle there. Idolatry. It's pretty bad, isn't it? Witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy. A lot of times we think jealousy is kind of an acceptable sin. It's something that, it's not as bad as, it's listed right up there with idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, discord, and all the other acts of the sinful nature. It is in there. So why is jealousy in that context such a bad thing?
Well, jealousy actually, it takes the energy in the relationship and it drains it. We have this myth and we think in society, well, if someone's jealous, then I will just lean into that and I will give them attention and I will provide whatever they need. But no amount of attention that you have is going to cure jealousy. Jealousy comes from within the other person. It's kind of like when something really good happens to you and the other person can't be happy for you, something's wrong. Something's wrong. It's just an indicator that something is not quite right. And again, we often think, oh, well, if I just am more, attentive to them, or if I take care of them more, or whatever. Actually, jealousy is not that way. Jealousy is bred within that person. So the only person that can change that aspect of themselves is themselves.
Man, good. Myth number 6. In order for the relationship to be successful, the other partner must change. If you would just get your act together, I would be a whole lot more happy with you, all right? Matthew 7:3 talks about this. When you're tempted to judge your brother, check that plank in your own eye before you try to get the speck of sawdust out of your friend's eye. And this is the spiritual dynamic is at work. So yeah, we all want the other person to change, and we know exactly how we want them to change, and we know how quickly we want them to change, and all this kind of thing. But what's wrong with that way of thinking?
Well, it does the blame thing. Have you ever heard of blaming when you're pointing one finger at someone else? There's like 3 pointing, glaring back at yourself. It's easy to blame, but the thing is what's the number one way to change someone else's behavior?
Force them?
Change your own. Change your own. So one of the things that helps a relationship is to look inward and look at the characteristics or qualities you feel like you need to have in order to help with that relationship. When I do couples counseling in my practice, one of the things that I have all the time is, well, you do this and you do that and rah, rah, rah. And I'm like, okay, hold on just a second. So if you were going to find one thing that you could do that would help the relationship, what might that be? And they're like, I'm like, I heard you. I hear you. But what would be one thing that would really help the relationship? And they're like, oh. And they may sit there for 5 whole minutes trying to think of one thing that they could do. And I often bring out the fair fighting rules. I think Barry did a sermon on that. Was that last year?
Well, yeah, it was the last snow day we had, and I did it. I did it from the house, and everybody kind of watched from home.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have the notes from that one. If you guys ever want to get a copy of that, it's a great resource. Yeah.
But a lot of times, we're like, well, if that person would only listen to me, or if that person would only do this one thing. I think one of the things we forget is we give and receive love differently, like Barry talked about last week, right, with the 5 love languages. But we fight differently too. There's functional ways to fight to resolve the issue, and there's dysfunctional ways to fight. Like, well, fine, I'm just going to let you do whatever, right? Well, that's a little bit one of those below the belt punches. You know what I mean? Like, instead of trying to think of things like, how can I, like on the fair fighting rules, how can I press to resolution? Not winning the fight, right? I mean, for those of us who are competitive, I'm like, I want to win, right? But the thing is what are you winning? What are you winning? You're not really winning for the relationship. You're actually on the same team, right? But we forget that oftentimes because, well, we don't feel like we're on the same team, right? We feel like, well, if they could understand what I was saying, right? But I really think that when we have this myth that comes up, that we look inward and we focus on what's one thing that I could do. And especially with our faith, how can I serve him to make him all that he can be? Or if you're the man, how can I serve her in a way that's going to make her be all that she can be? And am I praying for him? Am I, speaking his love language, right? That's not my love language. Physical touch is not, I have to think, okay, touch him, touch his back, rub his back, give him a hug, give him a kiss on the cheek. I have to intentionally think about that. But you know what? It's this much effort this much reward, right? And we have to think, okay, it's not about me. And I think sometimes we are so bent on, I need to be right here, or I need my needs met. What do we learn from friendships and marriages is that we can be the most selfish people on the face of the planet, right? And then you have a baby. Oh my goodness, we are the most selfish people on the planet. But God makes the establishment of marriage so that we can grow, right? Why does he put opposites together? I mean, someone who's laid back with someone who's a little bit too intense, you know, or someone who is late and someone who's early. Why does he do that? To torture us? No, it's to balance us out. It's to help us to grow.
Yeah, and you know, talking about that winning to win, we can win the battle and lose the war, right? And someone gave me an illustration one time that's really stuck with me. A lot of times battles in marriage kind of seem like a negotiating table. You know, you're on one side, I'm on the other side, and we're facing each other, and we are going back and forth against each other. The emotional word picture someone gave me one time said, both of you get on the same side of the table and see the problem on the other side of the table and work together to solve that problem. And that one picture in my mind changed a lot about the way I fought. And it's been a bigger help since I've learned that. So that was number 6. And now to number 7, last but not least. Therapy means your relationship is really in trouble. Now I need to say this: we're not trying to drum up more business for Noelle. This is not a soft sales pitch. She's booked out for more weeks than she probably should be right now, and you know, ethically she's not able to counsel family members and close friends anyway, which most of you are. So I promise you, this is not a plea to try to get everybody in her therapy room, but this is to say that a lot of people have a stigma in their mind. Oh, if you're seeing a marriage counselor, you must be really bad, you know? And it's not true. Every marriage has stuck places. Every marriage tries to figure it out themselves. And at some point in every marriage, and usually multiple points in every marriage, you get to a stuck place that you just can't figure out by yourself. And you need an outside party who's a little more objective and hopefully a little more experienced and can speak some coping skills or some wisdom or some ideas into your mind, some new things you can try, or just help change your perspective a little bit. And really that's what counseling is. It's about that. Proverbs 15:22 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, plans succeed. Why is it that self-help books are so popular in America right now? Well, in part, I think it's because people don't want to either go see a counselor and get that stigma that they have in their mind that maybe other people around them don't even think anything about, or they just, you know, maybe they're too stubborn or prideful, or they just don't want to go to someone else, but they can read a book about it. And I think there's so much wisdom out there in books, and I'm not here just to promote self-help books either. I think the Bible's the best book there is, but I think there's a lot of wisdom out there from people who specialize in relationships that have things to say. And I'll just tell you, I know I'm going to give you a chance to talk here in just a little bit, but you know, whenever Noelle goes to the thrift store, she's the thrift store, you know, princess over here. If she ever sees one of about 5 books on the bookshelf for 50 cents, $1, $2, whatever, she always gets it. Same, not because we don't have it, because we usually have several of each on our bookshelves. We use them to give away to other people. And so, you know, some of those books, and you can help me out with this, you know, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, His Needs, Her Needs, Boundaries, and there's several versions of that that's expanded into, you know, boundaries for couples, boundaries for singles, boundaries for kids, teenagers, whatever. The 5 Love Languages. Is there any others you can think of that we typically try to pick up anytime we see?
The Courage to Grieve.
The Courage to Grieve for people who are going through things like that. Because those books have touched so many people and hit on so many truths and gone so deep and helped so many relationships. They're just worth reading. Even if you're not in a kind of a problem spot in your marriage right now, it's good to proactively read things like that that are going to really help you see things from a better perspective and move in kind of a different way than you've been moving to get out of those stuck places. So what would you want to say about the stigma of seeing a counselor?
A couple things. One, I do want to go back to His Needs, Her Needs. One of the recommendations I actually do a lot of times is when when couples get to a stuck place is to read his needs, her needs, but he reads the her part and she reads the his part out loud to each other. It's a great book. But I think too, we don't have to get in a place where we go, I'm just gonna have to endure this. There are ways to communicate that you may not have thought of, that might not be in your repertoire of coping skills or whatever, that you just didn't even know about, right? And oftentimes therapists actually have a lot of tools in their tool belt. That's one thing that a therapist does, is to try to create this tool belt so that you aren't always trying to get the same tool at the same time, for everything. So like, if there's a plumber and they have a tool belt around their waist, they usually have different things, right? They might have a hammer, they might have a screwdriver, they might have like different things, right? The right tool at the right time makes all the difference. So you being able to put those tools in your tool belt and going, you know what, I've got these 15 tools right here for this situation, which one should I use? Oh, maybe that situation is I need some patience, or maybe I need to slow down the communication so or maybe I need to go, are you clarifying questions? Like, are you saying A, B, and C? And the other person's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Okay, tell me again, because I'm trying to hear what you're saying. Are you saying, 1, 2, 3? And the other person's like, yeah, I'm saying that, but there's a little bit difference here. So being able to clarify even is one tool that I find very helpful in marriages.
But, and I've heard this said, and you probably may have heard me quote this before, is if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. Because that's all you can do with a hammer, right? You can nail stuff down. You might can use the claw and pull something out, but it's not the one size fits all tool. We need different tools in the tool belt.
But I do want to say, like with therapy, this is the things. A lot of times we get so frustrated in the marriage relationship that our frustration is at a 10. We can't even hear what that other person's saying anymore because we're so significantly frustrated. So coming earlier on to a therapeutic approach is really, really helpful because your defenses are not so high. When couples come in and they're screaming and hollering and yelling, and that's not even their personalities, something's going on, right? Something has been hurt. And so how do you repair that? I think, and you would be shocked at how you can repair marriages. You really, really can. I had a couple that was like, they came in and they were like, we're coming to you just to give it lip service, but we know it's not gonna work, so next week we're gonna plan on divorce. And I'm like, oh. So we had our session and I'm like, okay, go on your way. After an hour, how much can you do in an hour? Like some odd years, like 20 or so years. So I'm like, oh my goodness, right? And so we made another appointment. They come back and I was like, well, did you file? And they were like, no. And I'm like, well, what happened? And they were like, well, some of those tools that we talked about last time, we did some of those. And I was like, yeah, you did. And they were like, yeah. So we're gonna keep coming back. And I was like, fantastic. I mean, I can tell someone all day long I think their marriage will survive, but if they don't believe it, it's not really gonna matter, right? So I think part of it is this a speed bump or is this a brick wall? Oftentimes we think something's a brick wall, when really it's a speed bump. Let's figure out how to manage this issue or problem or concern. Instead of like, oh, I'm just gonna throw my hands up and just give up and walk away. You've made an investment into that relationship, whether it be a spouse relationship or a parent relationship or a child relationship. So how can you work through that?
Excellent, excellent. Well, I appreciate everything you've had to say, and we probably spent more time narrowing down what we weren't going to say than what we were going to say today. So depending on the feedback we get from how today went, we may do a series later that looks something like this, that is more marriage oriented, that is something where we can delve deeper, go a little longer, provide more tools, that kind of thing, if you guys feel like that would be helpful. So feel free to give us feedback on how things went today and if it was helpful, and if you think you would want some more, and maybe we can do that in a future series. But I wanted to do that one-off today from what we've been doing, because I think if you don't have your marriage in order, it's hard to put other people out there and be great influences for them, because the stress you're feeling on the inside and the worry and the things that go on, the inner turmoil, can really kind of bleed over into the work relationships and the neighbor relationships and the extended family and all these kinds of things. So there really is a reason God wants us to prioritize our spouses. And it can be just the most difficult relationship ever, because not only is it the person you love the most, there's also the person you live with, right? And nobody's perfect, and nobody has perfect habits, and exactly mirroring each other's perspectives and values and those kind of things. But God can use that to make us wiser for the wear as we do that. So I hope we'll go into our marriages thinking God's using this to refine me as a person, and I don't need to put 100% of my energy into fixing them as much as reflecting back to me, where am I being exposed in my character that I can do better. Amen? All right. So let's have the band come on back up. Thank you, Noelle. Let's give her a big thank you for what she was able to share with us today. And I'm going to pray, and then Noelle, if you could take care of the camera, that'd be great. God, please bless our marriages. Bless us with perspectives and hearts that want to be better disciples of Jesus, that want to have better marriages, that want to put the hard work in, to do the emotional work that we need to do. And God, I pray that where there are issues, God, that we would look into your word, we would depend on your spirit, and we would be willing to get many advisors if we need to make plans succeed, to make marriages work, and that we would follow the spirit of your word, of who you are, to become who we need to be, so that we can be more people of influence and love better.